Imagine the situation: a father angry, having discovered his daughter has been seeing someone he doesn't approve of. Perhaps the local seducer, perhaps a poor boy he looks down on, someone with a reputation, and a bad one at that. And so he reprimands the daughter. It goes like this.
She hears me strike the board and say that she is under ban of all good men and women, being mentioned with a man that has the worst of all bad names, and thereupon replies, that his hair is beautiful, cold as the March wind his eyes. What I like about this is the clash of worlds, of thoughts, of minds, of beings. The father, sensible, trying to control the daughter, laying down the law, thou shalt not hang around with that man of dubious character, the one with the notorious reputation. Very sensible, respectable, doing the fatherly thing. But look at her response. She doesn't argue with her father or get angry. Her response comes from a totally different world. The man's hair is beautiful, cold as the March wind his eyes. She is besotted with the beauty and allure of the man, obsessed with desire. This is the world of a young woman in love, and so utterly outside the parameters of the father's vision or control. There's no dialogue. These are two separate monologues from two different planes of existence. And it's this utter clash of worlds that I love. And of course the girl's response comes at the end. So in this dialectical clash, we are left feeling that her vision is triumphant. The vision of love.
My name's Tim Kelly, and today I'm going to talk about poetry. Say something about its value and its key features or qualities. So this will be a shortish, simple introduction to poetry.
Right, so poetry was originally an oral art form, something spoken or sung. It was used as a narrative mechanism, as a means of recounting stories. And in order for those stories to be better remembered and recounted, poets used rhythm and rhyme in their recitals. And the use of auditory techniques has survived as a major strand in poetry throughout its history. Robert Browning's The Pied Piper of Hamelin is one of my favourite examples of a narrative poem. And it tells the story of a musician who cured the town of rat infestation, only to wreak a terrible revenge on the townsfolk when the council broke their promise to pay him. I'll read you a short excerpt which outlines the problem the town had. Rats. They fought the dogs and killed the cats and bit the babies in the cradles and ate the cheeses out of the vats and licked the soup from the cook's own ladles, split open the kegs of salted sprats, made nests inside men's Sunday hats, and even spoiled the women's chats by drowning their speaking with shrieking and squeaking in 50 different sharps and flats. This has so many lovely oral features. The use of plosive alliteration in bit the babies, and you have consonants, that's just repetition of the same consonant sound, elsewhere with the s, p and t consonants. Split open the kegs of salted sprats. But it's the thumping iambic rhythm that really stands out. They fought the dogs and killed the cats and bit the babies in the cradles. De-dum, 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 whose momentum seems to accelerate towards the end, through both the drama of the poem and by shortening the lines, by drowning their speaking with shrieking and squeaking. Note we've only 2 beats instead of 4 per line here. And of course this illustrates that other mnemonic sona feature, rhyme, with not just rhyming end lines here, but also internal rhymes, speaking, shrieking, squeaking. Let's listen one more time. Rats. They fought the dogs and killed the cats and bit the babies in the cradles and ate the cheeses out of the vats and licked the soup from the cook's own ladles, split open the kegs of salted sprats, made nests inside men's Sunday hats, and even spoiled the women's chats by drowning their speaking with shrieking and squeaking in 50 different sharps and flats. It's the rhythm and the rhyme primarily which give dramatic power to the words and a driving momentum to the action and story. Let's take another example, this time from the Irish poet we mentioned at the start, William Butler Yeats. Yeats, in his famous poem on the Irish Uprising of 1916, utilises more subtle sonic features, assonance and consonance, that's repetition of vowel and consonant sounds, which, whilst less obvious, are still key to the overall effect. Let's read a short extract. Too long a sacrifice can make a stone of the heart. Oh, when may it suffice? That is heaven's part. Our part to murmur name upon name as a mother names her child, when sleep at last has come on limbs that had run wild. Let's just listen to that again. Murmur name upon name as a mother names her child. Here we have repetition of the and consonants. Murmur, name, mother names. And at the same time, repetition of the and a vowels. So these auditory repetitions add to the chant-like effect here, and the consciousness of the sound on one's lips adds an intimate quality to the recitation, which is particularly appropriate to the image of the pregnant young woman murmuring names for her baby as she falls into sleep. So, whilst perhaps more subtle than the thumping rhythm and witty rhymes of the Browning poem, these oral and oral, that's oral with an O and oral with an A, are nevertheless key to providing the overall sonic impact. So always pay attention to sound in poetry, whether it be the rhythm, what we call meter in poetry, or the rhyming words, or the use of alliteration, consonants, assonance, or the oral qualities of the words themselves. One other feature I haven't mentioned in relation to sound in poetry is onomatopoeia, which relates to word formation from associated sounds, or what we often think of as words that sound like the thing they represent. Boom, bang, tick-tock, meow, and so on. I won't say anything about it now other than to bear it in mind, but also bear in mind that these words are often language or culture specific. Does a cow really moo and a dog go woof? And is sizzle really the sound of bacon frying? Well, perhaps in English linguistic culture, but not necessarily elsewhere. But feel free to exploit onomatopoeic words, as any philosophical or linguistic objections may not matter, given you are likely writing in one language, presumably English, or for a particular linguistic culture. A second key feature of poetry is the use of imagery, whether this be figurative or metaphorical use, or simply the use of arresting visual images. Take a look at William Carlos Williams' poem, The Red Wheelbarrow. So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater, beside the white chickens. I'll talk in detail about this poem another time, but for sure it's the use of contrasting colours and visual textures here that create a stark and powerful, immediately visualizable image. Common in poetry is the use of figurative language. That's language that is metaphorical rather than literal. Take Sylvia Plath's poem, conveniently enough entitled Metaphors, in which she lays out a series of metaphorical images to describe her pregnancy, the state of being pregnant, and her feelings about it.
Metaphors by Sylvia Plath. I'm a riddle in 9 syllables, an elephant, a ponderous house, a melon strolling on 2 tendrils. O red fruit, ivory, fine timbers, this loaf's big with its yeasty rising. Money's new minted in this fat purse. I'm a means, a stage, a cow in calf. I've eaten a bag of green apples, boarded the train, there's no getting off.
So not only is there an emphasis on the change to her body and its swollen size, she's an elephant, a melon, a rising loaf, a cow, and so on, but she also alludes to bitter feelings in the sourness of the green apples and the digestive discomfort this might cause, along with the fact she feels trapped. There's no getting off the train, no way out of her current predicament. A similar figurative technique is the use of simile. A simile being a comparative form, using like or as or another comparative. So instead of saying I'm an elephant, which is a metaphorical usage, you might say I'm like an elephant or as big as an elephant, and so on. Or take Keats's La Belle Dame sans Merci, in which the poet describes seduction and love through the voice of its victim, a medieval knight. Here's an extract. I met a lady in the meads, full beautiful, a fairy's child. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. I made a garland for her head, and bracelets too, and fragrant zone. She looked at me as she did love, and made sweet moan. She found me roots of relish sweet, and honey wild, and manna dew, and sure in language strange she said, I love thee true. But the knight falls asleep and dreams a terrible dream. I saw pale kings and princes too, pale warriors, death pale were they all. They cried, La Belle Dame sans Merci hath thee in thrall. I saw their starved lips in the gloam, with horrid warning gaped wide, and I awoke and found me here on the cold hillside. For sure enough, the lady is gone. Like the protagonist, all are abandoned victims of a femme fatale, and it's the draining of the colour from the visual images in the poem which give a sense of the men as discarded remnants of the amorous vampire that is love. Pale kings, pale warriors, death pale. There's an overwhelming sense of loss here, the shocking loss of love and the emotional starvation that is abandonment. I saw their starved lips in the gloam, with horrid warning gaped wide. At the end of the poem, the knight is left alone, abandoned to emotional and physical isolation, in a bleak landscape without song. And this is why I sojourn here, alone and palely loitering, though the sedge is withered from the lake, and no birds sing. And it's the combination of visuals and the sound that really gives power to this poem. It's not just the colourlessness of the images, but notice how the end line of each stanza shortens, how the rhythm breaks down to staccato with missing beats, leaving a lacuna, a sense of something lost, mirroring in its form and metre the theme it is portraying. When love is gone, there's nothing left, no purpose, no colour, no music, no birds sing. It's probably the most desperate poem about lost love in the English language. And emotional power is, I think, another feature of the best poetry, such as Keats's. For poetry touches on those most tender and vulnerable spots in our hearts, and not just in a romantic way, but even within the existential and political realm. Take Bertolt Brecht, for example, the German communist playwright and poet who fled his homeland under the Nazi terror when many artists and writers were being persecuted for their work. He, like other artists in those days, had to face horrors that many of us might find difficult to comprehend, but Brecht refused to give up his work. He puts it simply enough in the poem And I Always Thought, like this. And I always thought the very simplest words must be enough. When I say what things are like, everyone's hearts must be torn to shreds. That you'll go down if you don't stand up for yourself. Surely you see that. A cry to arms in a time of terror. It poses the question, if you don't stand up for yourself, who will? So a fraternal call, a call of empathy, but also a vindication of self. Or as Bob Marley put it a little later, get up, stand up, don't give up the fight. So emotion and power are two interlinked features I associate with the best poetry. Think back to the opening poem by Yeats in this talk, Father and Child, in which the girl's portrayal of her lover, his hair is beautiful, cold as the March wind his eyes, is overwhelming. Or take the Russian poet Pushkin. Listen to how he describes the awakening of the prophet in the poem of the same name, when an angel comes down from heaven to empower him. And, like a lover kissing me, he rooted out this tongue of mine, fluent in lies and vanity. He tore my fainting lips apart, and with his right hand steeped in blood, he armed me with his serpent's dart. With his bright sword he split my breast, my heart leapt to him with a bound, a glowing, livid coal he pressed into the hollow of the wound. This is incredibly powerful, violent, erotic imagery. And the encounter with God's agent kills the human subject of the poem. There in the desert I lay dead. And God called out to me and said, Rise, prophet, rise and hear and see, and let my words be seen and heard by all who turn aside from me, and burn them with my fiery word. And the religious surface is widely regarded as a metaphor for an aesthetic rebirth. The prophet is the poet. And the Pushkin poem is not just immensely powerful, but it's about finding a powerful voice, about speaking out to the world. Burn them with your fiery word. And voice, finding your poetic voice, is the last feature I want to highlight here. Or rather, I'll let the late, great Gil Scott-Heron do it for me.
Remarkable sort of an art form. But what happened is that in many instances we didn't learn about that. We learned about the kind of poetry that nobody could understand. Like on 17th Street, 9th Avenue, when I was a teenager, man, we didn't want to hear nothing about poetry. Somebody say something about poetry, we say, oh yeah, where's he at? Bring him on over here. Because we was into shooting the jumper, and that was damn near all. So in the 9th grade, like a teacher sneaked up on us and put these pieces of paper on the table, told everybody to read them, and then tell her what we thought about it. So I said, well, it's all right. Shit, I'll try it. I looked at the poem said, what now upside the wall I see? A shadow of an image me. I said, well, God damn, let me read this again. What now upside the wall? In the back of the room, somebody said, hey, this must be deep. Because you know, like, this must be deep is like a drape that we throw over everything, you know, like what we must be, this must be deep means that, like, I recognize all of these words individually. But damn if I can get anything out of the order in which they currently appear. This must be deep. I mean, because you figure it must be deep, it's in this book. You say, well, why the hell would they put it in this book if it didn't mean nothing? Because ordinarily you read that, don't mean nothing to you. You say, hey, this must be nonsense. But you don't want to say that with the teacher standing right next to you. Why you give me this, you know? So you say, hey, this must be deep. And what happens is that when a lot of folks get ready to write poetry, that's what they decide they're going to be, deep. They decide they're going to be poetic. So they come up to me, people come up to me sometimes and say, hey, read my poem. I read it. What's now upside the wall I see. And the only thing I can say to them is, hey, this must be deep. Because like being influenced by the kind of poetry that we were all introduced to, people feel as though like the way to be poetic is to make sure that there's certain little parts of it can't nobody understand. Why would you need a poet to make things more complex? Two winos can make things more complex. One of them say to the other one, well, is it, well, is that you? And the other one look at him right serious and say, yeah. And they communicated. You see, if communication is what it's all about, as far as most people sitting around watching it could have been two poets talking to one another. They didn't have a clue. So the idea became not only to use ideas that were familiar to people in the community, but to use the language that everybody could understand. Of course, it's
So, when trying to find a voice, you don't have to be poetic, pretentious, flowery, or artificial. You should instead find a way to articulate the voice that is yours. And here's Gil doing just that.
the new poetry that evolved in our society concerned the fact that folks wanted to use both words that people could understand as well as talk about ideas that people could understand. One such poem, at least an early poem of ours that went in that direction, concerned the fact that millions and millions of dollars are continually sent into outer space while we continue to face the same problems here on the ground. Poem said, a rat done bit my sister Nell with Whitey on the moon, and her face and arms began to swell, and Whitey's on the moon. I can't pay no doctor bills, but Whitey's on the moon. 10 years from now, I'll be paying still while Whitey's on the moon. You know, the man just upped my rent last night because Whitey's on the moon. No hot water, no toilets, and no lights, but Whitey's on the moon. I wonder why he's upping me. Because Whitey's on the moon? I was already giving him $50 a week, and now Whitey's on the moon. Taxes taking my whole damn check. The junkies make me a nervous wreck. The price of food is going up. And as if all that crap wasn't enough, a rat done bit my sister Nell with Whitey on the moon. Her face and arms began to swell, and Whitey's on the moon. Was all that money I made last year for Whitey on the moon? How come I ain't got no money here? Whitey's on the moon. You know, I just about had my fill of Whitey on the moon. I think I'll send these doctor bills, air mail special, to Whitey on the moon.
Okay, so just to recap, those things you should bear in mind when writing poetry are sound. Always read your poems out loud, so you get a feel for what they're like tripping off the tongue. Imagery. What visual arresting images are you using, and how do the images string together across the poem? And also, beyond craft, poetry at its best can be a powerful emotional experience for both the composer and for the listener or reader. And finally, you should write in a voice or in voices that feel natural to you. Never try and imagine what the poetic voice should be like, but try and find something that works for you.